Hello, everybody. What's up? Welcome into the Athletic Fantasy Baseball Podcast here on a Friday where I'm sitting in Chicago. An absolutely beautiful Friday. A great way to get the weekend started. Michael Beller sitting in the chair for Derek Van Riper, who is on a very, 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 very extremely well-deserved vacation here. So I'm taking over with Al Melchior to break down this weekend's fantasy baseball waiver wire. Al, it's been a while since I've been on the waiver wire bike. I hope, the training wheels are off. I might need you to hold the back of the seat, though, for a little bit, just so I can get steady.
You know what they say about riding the waiver wire bike. It's like, you can always get back on.
You can always hop right back on. Well, the best way to hop back on, especially when we're getting used to it, getting ourselves reaccustomed to it, I think the best way for me to hop back on, at least, is with Christopher Morel. I'm diving right in, and I'm diving in with Christopher Morel. We'll go shallow bats, deep league bats, pitchers. We'll go into the closer corner. We'll talk about streamers for this upcoming week. But I'm going to start with Christopher Morel. You and I talked with Sahadev Sharma, one of our Cubs beat writers here at The Athletic, about Morel yesterday. He is definitely more of a shallow league bat at this point. But, Al, we both came away from that conversation with Sahadev feeling great about Morel's playing time and the fact that David Ross is going to have the green light on for him for the foreseeable future. I mean, to me, this seems like a guy who should be owned. I mean, it's hard to say universally, but in almost any league where Christopher Morel enters your thought process, he should probably be on a team.
Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't even shy away from saying that Morel is a universal ad because, first of all, the things that did get discussed on the show yesterday, like you mentioned, the playing time is not going to be a problem. Mm-hmm. The stolen bases are going to be there for the foreseeable future. What he has shown so far in a few weeks in the major leagues, all the skills that he showed in the minor leagues, they have translated so far. Now, of course, we talk about this all the time, that there's a game of adjustments, that he'll, certainly cool off at some point. Pitchers will adjust to him. He will be then challenged to counter adjust. But I think if nothing else, you mm-hmm. figure there's potential there for steals. You could get a whole lot more than just that. And you talk about even 10-team leagues. I mean, everybody needs steals, right? Yeah. So I feel like there's reason enough to go after Morel even in 10-team leagues. And he's far from at that level in terms of roster rate. I mean, the roster rates are still pretty modest. So even 12-teamers, there's been some hesitation to pick up mm-hmm. Morel. There's absolutely no reason not to in 12-teamers at this point.
Hey, for what it's worth, Al, as you and I are talking, as we're doing the show live, thanks to everyone joining us on YouTube. And for people who are listening to the podcast version of this, Al and I are doing this as the Cubs and Cardinals have gotten our weekend off to a start here. Christopher Morel's 1 for 2 with a run scored in that game right now. It's for, and I mean, he seems to, like, if you have him under, he seems there. A couple of the boxes are filled in every day. Some day it's a run and an RBI, some day it's a run and a steal, but it seems like he does a little bit of something every single day here. And what else we love about Christopher Morel, Al? He seems locked in to that leadoff spot. The Cubs have been searching for an answer in the leadoff spot since Dexter Fowler. And they haven't. They've tried Kyle Schwarber there. They've tried Ian Happ there, Wilson Contreras, Anthony Rizzo. They've gone through so many different leadoff men. And since Christopher Morel has made himself a fixture in the lineup, he has been atop this lineup. And I don't see David Ross changing that anytime soon.
Yeah. I mean, it would take a big slump, but that's a risk that mm-hmm. you take with anybody in, pretty much any batting order spot. Maybe a little bit of a shorter leash with Morel because he is still very inexperienced. But yeah, I think that, again, there's such an array of skills there that even if he moves down the order, even if the power dissipates a little bit, even if the steals slow down, there's something there that we can use in fantasy.
All right, Al, I guess we can't make this the Christopher Morel show only, so let's move on here. Let's talk about Michael Harris, who made the jump straight from Double-A to the majors, was raking at the Double-A level with the Braves. 5 homers, hitting 305, 372, 506, and 196 plate appearances, and now up with the big league club. Where do you find him to be viable right now?
Well, what I wrote in the waiver column for this week is that Harris should be picked up in 12-team leagues. There's not really been a lot of activity on that level yet for Harris, mm-hmm. which frankly surprises me a little bit because whoever the latest top prospect call-up is, I mean, there's always a lot of excitement and activity around that prospect. Yeah. He's still at or near the top of most added lists on the various sites right now, but still a relatively low roster rate. So I get that next frontier is the 12-teamers. I don't think that Harris should actually be starting there yet. He's batting at the bottom of the order for Atlanta. He's off to a little bit of a slow start, but it's first of all, very small sample. He's played 6 games so far. In those 6 games, the statistical bag is a mixed one at this point, but you can see some signs of hope. Hitting a lot of ground balls, but the balls he is hitting in the air, he's hitting very hard. So that's a great sign right off the bat, so to speak. So but you look at the minor league numbers that you cited, there's potential there. There is upside. So I think that he's somebody that, especially in 5 outfielder leagues, 12-team leagues, needs to be picked up, stashed, see if he moves up the order, see if maybe he can hit with some consistency over the next week or two coming up, because you don't want to wait until he has a good week and then you're really having to pay a premium to get him in fab.
Yeah, definitely. You always, if you're going to take a shot on a prospect, you're going to want to be a week early rather than a week late, because we know what a big difference that can make. And we'll be talking about another such player a little bit later in the show. But for now, let's get to the guy who has been a huge part of one of the funniest stories that we've seen this entire season. The only time you've ever wanted to hear about anyone else's fantasy football league is if it involves Jock Peterson, Tommy Pham, and Mike Trout. And Jock Peterson is the guy we bring up here. Al, I'm surprised we're able to bring him up. This is a guy who's been hitting for a ton of power this season. He's got 12 homers. He's slugging .583. He's getting on base with that 340 OBP. The K rate way down compared with previous career norms. This feels like a guy who should have graduated from a waiver wire discussion, and yet here we are on June 3rd talking about Jock Peterson.
Yeah, well, I think some of that may just be because of, first of all, the Giants and how they use players and platooning a lot of spots. And Peterson's been a platoon player in a number of situations that he's been in. So that's always a little bit of a risk week to week, is how much is he going to play? But right now he's just an incredible heater. So it might be a little bit of a shorter term play than what you might think, given those overall numbers that you were just citing. But who knows? I mean, we certainly know that Peterson has that ability to hit for power, in a good lineup. So again, I don't know, he's necessarily somebody that you're never going to drop from here forward, but definitely needs to be in 12 teamers and probably 10 teamers for the time being.
This is another guy who got some run as a Cubs leadoff man in recent years, who wasn't able to stick. And the Cubs did give him some run as not just a platoon guy, as a guy against lefties. It didn't quite work out as well as you would have hoped if you want him to be that long-term fixture of a fantasy lineup. So some you're going to keep your eye on, but I mean, if he can keep mashing to this degree, I think you'll be happy with it, even if he does get the bench against lefties going forward. So a guy who can provide power in a year where that's proving to be harder to come by than what we've seen in recent years. And I think we can say the same about our next guy, Trey Mancini, a guy who has been a fantasy fixture in years past and has fallen off a little bit from there. But the pop, we know, for Mancini is always something that you can rely on when he's going good. It's for real, at least. When he's connecting with the ball, the pop is for real, and he finds his way into both your waiver column and our waiver discussion here today.
Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons why I included Mancini in the column, and while it's relevant to think about him as one of your ads. And I think we're talking about 12 teamers here because he's not likely to be available elsewhere. But first of all, though, I just really like the Orioles schedule this week. A couple of games at home against the Cubs. They'll face Kyle Hendricks and Keegan Thompson. Now, Keegan Thompson's, I think, going to be the toughest starter they face this week. But then
that's a good schedule. No offense, Keegan.
Yeah. Yeah, then they go to KC and some really, really favorable matchups against the Royals there. So I like that schedule for the Orioles. And on top of that, the Orioles as a team, they've actually been hitting pretty well lately. They're kind of middle of the pack offensively, which again, it's not great, but better than I was certainly expecting. I think probably better than a lot of us think about when we think about the Orioles lineup. So Mancini hitting near the top of that lineup around some other hitters that are going very well right now. There's run production possibilities, and also an opportunity for a real fab bargain with Mancini, because as you alluded to, Michael, the power hasn't been there for him so far this year, but the underlying power indicators are still there. He's still, barrel rate is right where it's been year in and year out. The velocity numbers, exit velocity numbers, are what you would expect from Trey Mancini. So it seems like he's gotten a bit of a raw deal through the first couple of months. So it might just be great timing that he's going to have some really good matchups. The indicators suggest he should be hitting for more power anyway. I think the X slugging is something like in the upper 500s right now for him. So, before maybe it becomes more apparent that he can still hit for power when he has some of these good matchups, pick up Mancini now. Should be pretty, shouldn't really cost you much in your 12 team leagues.
From one Oriole to another, we discuss Austin Hayes now, a guy who I assume part of this is the same, Al, that the matchups are good for him, but also a guy who's just swinging the bat pretty well. So far, 302, 373, 453 on the season. Another guy who it feels like he should be getting a little bit more attention in shallow leagues than he's been getting to this point.
Yeah, and that again, just sort of like with Mancini, that's likely where you're able to still add Hayes, but a worthy add, again, hitting right in the middle of the Orioles lineup. You've got Mancini, Santander, Mountcastle, all bunched up there. Yeah, Rutschman still needs to get going, but you've got a lot of hitters that have really been locked in lately. So it's, like you said, same story for Austin Hayes, available in some shallower leagues. He's been going really well, and a really favorable schedule this week.
All right, let's talk about someone who is not going to give you much power, but is going to get on base quite a bit. Luis Arraez. I mean, what a fascinating line this guy is putting up so far this season. It's not often that you get a guy who is nearly 200 plate appearances into his season with a 429 OBP and a 392 slug. If we see someone who's got 35 more points of on-base percentage than slug, it's usually like a 100 OBP and a 65 slug, like a pitcher who happened to draw a walk back when pitchers used to hit. But Arraez is going to play a ton. He's going to get on base, 13% walk rate versus an 8.5% strikeout rate. No homers, no steals, but there's value in a guy who can get on base like this.
Yeah, there absolutely is. So he's a bit of a categorical play. You certainly, if you need a little bit of help in batting average, you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody who's going to help you more than Luis Arraez is, hitting pretty consistently at the top of the Twins lineup. So there's some runs to be scored there. So a very specific appeal that he has, but he serves a need that a lot of us have.
And hey, with the Twins in Toronto this weekend, he's not one of the guys on the restricted list. So very good to know that Luis Arraez taking care of business, taking care of himself. Very good that he is in the lineup for the Twins this weekend with the team in Toronto. One more shallow league bat to talk about, and it's a guy in the same series, Danny Jansen. Let's get into Danny Jansen. Where does he fit into this fantasy shallow bat picture for you, Al?
I think, when we talk about shallow bats for catchers, I mean, we are talking one catcher league. So I think it's relevant here. It might be a shorter term play with Danny Jansen. I mean, he's red hot, heading for a ton of power. He's not getting maybe quite as consistent, a consistent number of starts as you would like to see. And I think for me, that's part of what makes me hedge a little bit about talking about him as a one catcher league catcher. But I think given that you're seeing the power from him, great lineup, obviously, that he's hitting in when he is playing, that let's say that you want to give Rutschman a breather in your one catcher league until he kind of picks things up there. Jansen's a great short-term replacement. And, who knows, maybe there will be more to it than just that.
And some good news for the Blue Jays, too, in this series. Just getting the lineup here, if you're watching us live, and George Springer, who has missed the last two games with an illness, a non-COVID illness, back in the lineup, back atop the lineup for the Blue Jays tonight against the Twins. So feel free and good about firing up George Springer in any leagues where you are making changes headed into the weekend. Let's make some changes with some deeper league bats out. And let's start with Ramon Urias. Where is he getting into the picture for you?
Deep leagues. And I mean, when I say deep, I'm talking 14, 15 teams. This is somebody that if my memory is serving me correctly, I wrote about a lot prior to the season. He was definitely somebody I was looking for to draft. I drafted him in a lot of leagues. Then I dropped Urias in a lot of leagues, even fit the 15 teamers, because he just didn't do a whole lot in April. But the last couple of weeks, he's really turned it on. Urias has been red hot. And so you take that, and then you add in all the things that we said about Austin Hayes and Trey Mancini. Great schedule coming up. Great opportunity for Urias to just continue on this hot streak that he's been on. And again, maybe there is more to it than just this, because he did show some decent power last year, which was part of the reason that I liked him coming into this year. I don't think playing time is going to be any sort of issue for him for the foreseeable future. So at least for the coming week, a good week to pick him up and maybe look for even more down the road.
Yeah, Orioles, like you said, Al, has been just a little bit better offensively than a team that, we already are writing off as a playoff contender this season, and with good reason. It's not just about the division they're in. They wouldn't be really much of a playoff contender in any division. But they've got some guys who we've always been interested in the fantasy world, and they're going pretty good right now. So an interesting team to take a look at, a different sort of bad team from the fantasy perspective. And Ramon Urias is a guy who is adding to that. Cincinnati Reds, not exactly a different sort of bad team, although they haven't been nearly as bad as their dreadful start to the season. And Kyle Farmer, going pretty good of late. Had a hitting streak, a 10-game hitting streak, snapped just a couple of days ago, but then got right back in the horse, 3 for 7 over his last 2 games, including a homer against the Nationals on Thursday. So this is someone who can play multiple positions, obviously sticking at shortstop for the Reds, and the glove's going to play. The glove's going to keep him in the lineup, and now the bat doing some work as well.
Yeah, and he is in a bit of a heater right now, so there's that element to his fantasy appeal. But I think it's just more that over the last couple of seasons, we've seen Kyle Farmer, somebody who can hit for moderate power.
Mm-hmm.
He's getting playing time. He can be a compiler, even though he tends to hit towards the bottom third of the Reds lineup. But nobody that's really exciting, and so I think he gets overlooked. But by the same token, somebody who does just enough that I think he's a bit under rostered, definitely needs to be rostered in 15 teamers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just the kind of thing that every week we need to bring in maybe 1 or 2 players in those 15 team leagues because there's somebody out with an injury or they've been demoted or whatever. And, just consider Farmer as that kind of end of the roster bat who can plug in some good numbers for you.
And you know what, we don't think about defense really in the fantasy world, but defense does have a role to play in that. Defense can keep someone in the lineup.
Yeah.
And you're talking about a deep league, middle infielder, sometimes just a volume of at-bats is what you are looking for. Obviously, you want to see some underlying numbers that can support a level of production that's not just going to crush your batting average or your OBP, whatever your league might use. And you do have that with Farmer, but you also have the glove that is going to certainly keep him in the lineup. And this is not just he's on the Reds, who else are they going to play situation. The guy can really glove it out there. And so he's going to play. He is definitely going to play for the Reds, and sometimes that does a whole lot of work for you with those deep league middle infielders. Kyle Farmer, a guy who definitely should be getting some love for that glove and the bat on the waiver wire this week. How about Evan Longoria, a guy who just remains in our fantasy lives here? Al, where are you looking at him for deeper fantasy leagues? Where do you think he's viable? Is this 14, 15? I mean, what are you looking at?
Definitely 14, 15. He's still available in some of those leagues. I think he's on the cusp of being relevant in 12 teamers, meaning, he's somebody that you can look at and weigh him against your other options. I going into this current week, I have a 12 teamer with Manny Machado at third base, and he did wind up playing, but if you recall over the weekend, he was questionable,
right?
And I picked up Longoria just as insurance. So that's when I say on the cusp, that's sort of what I mean is that, he could fill in for your injured third baseman if you do have one, or, just somebody that might make their way into your lineup, or just might be somebody that you stream off the bench. I'm never completely confident about Longoria's playing time. Again, the Giants, it's a Giants thing, but he's hitting. I mean, he missed a couple of days earlier this week, but he's back in the lineup. So that's not really a concern going forward, but already 5 home runs for him in just 60 plate appearances. And we saw the return of some power hitting for Longoria. So we saw that in 2021. So, here, as long as he's playing, you may not necessarily get the batting average, but you're going to get it's probably some steady power and some steady run production from Longoria.
Age 36 season, but until last year, health was never a question for Longoria. Yeah. I mean, you can maybe ding him a little bit for 2018 and 2019, but we're talking about a guy who was already into his mid-30s, playing 125 and 129 games, getting more than 500 plate appearances. Like, I'm not going to ding a guy for that. You got to assume, as guys get into their mid and late 30s, that there's going to be some injury, and there obviously has been for him this season as well. But the production's been there when he's been healthy, and the health is really, I would say, as little of a question as it could be for a guy who's in his age 36 season. And that's where we're at with Evan Longoria. So if you're looking for some help at third, looking for some help at the corners, good lineup, a team that is once again getting overshadowed. That's just going to be the case when you play in a division with the Dodgers and now the Padres, who are once again doing what we expect them to do. It happened in the first half last season. That obviously tapered off. It's happening in the first half again this season, even without Fernando Tatis. So the Giants getting overshadowed once again out west. But Evan Longoria still doing his thing, doing some good work for the Giants, can do some good work for you if you were able to snag him off the waiver wire this week. How about one of my favorites, also a guy out west, David Peralta, a guy who I've always stood by, a guy who I recently grabbed to fill in for some ailing outfielders. And it's sort of similar to what we're talking about with Longoria, right? I mean, the rates haven't been great this season, but the power's been there. He's going to play every day. He's going to hit in the middle of that Arizona order. It's an Arizona team that's been better than expected. David Peralta's not winning you your league, but he can give you some nice stats here if you use him in the interim.
Yeah, and he's really widely available. Everything you just said there, Michael, is a good part of an argument to go and try to add Peralta. I don't think he's quite 12-team relevant yet, but the way that he wound up in the waiver column this week was that I was looking at a leaderboard that compares last year's stats to this year's stats on Fangraphs. You should check it out. I think it's called the Season Stat Grid. And by a pretty big margin too, nobody has increased their average launch angle more than David Peralta has this year.
Interesting.
Yeah, really interesting. And I mean, so this is somebody who's always kind of leaned a little bit towards being a ground ball hitter. That is out the window this year. He's gone extreme fly ball. And yeah, it's showing up in the power stats. I mean, he's on pace to have one of his best, if not his best seasons in terms of power and driving and runs. The run total, I talked about this a little bit in the waiver column. That was a little bit fluky. He hasn't scored a lot of runs, but in spite of not having scored a lot of runs, he's still been a top 50 outfielder up to this point, and he could be even better going forward. So definitely somebody that's got to be in all the deeper leagues and maybe at least on the watch list for 12-teamers.
Driving home that point Al made about the increased fly ball rate. Last year, David Peralta, 8 homers and 538 plate appearances. This year, 8 homers and 176 plate appearances. So a guy that, I don't know, I also take a lot of stock, Al, when we see a guy in age 34 season for David Peralta, been around the block a few times in the majors, has dealt with injury, has come back from, very interesting story, obviously, when he first got back into the majors at age 26. It's a guy who can make those adjustments at this stage of his career. That is a very clear focus. That's not happening by accident. And the guy who can make that sort of adjustment, who can go into the lab, who can say, what's worked for me. Obviously, he's had some monster seasons. What worked for me 3-4 years ago, it's not working anymore. And to reinvent himself on the fly, a guy who proved he could do that in a big, big way when he first got to the majors with Arizona, now doing it once again 8 years later, that's impressive. And it's something that I think we should think is foundational enough to stick around for a guy who's got this sort of track record, a guy who is a veteran. Definitely give him a lot of credit for being able to do that and think that this can have some staying power. This isn't just a 2-month stretch where he happens to be having what turns out to be his best 2-month stretch of the season. So certainly like to see that. We talked about the glove playing with Kyle Farmer and keeping him in Cincinnati's lineup. Glove's always going to play for Kevin Kiermaier, so he's going to be in there. And Al, this is just like a rite of passage. I'm so happy that the episode that I'm sitting in for DVR is a Kevin Kiermaier episode, because at some point in every Major League Baseball season, you are going to talk about Kevin Kiermaier as a waiver wire deep league fantasy ad. So here we are doing the Kevin Kiermaier thing. What makes him interesting to you right now?
Well, he's here really because of David Peralta, because when I did that leaderboard search right behind him, or maybe not right behind him, but just
rubbing elbows, same neighborhood.
Was Kevin Kiermaier. So a little bit of a different story there, because as opposed to Peralta, where he's really just showing a completely different profile than we've ever seen from him. For Kiermaier, you say that there's always some point where we talk about him. That's not really been the case in 2020 and in 2021. So this is like a return to the 20 teens for Kevin Kiermaier. Somebody who, as long as he stays healthy, could give you a little bit of power, give you some steals, 15-10 season, very much in reach this year. So it's kind of a return to old, but he has managed to stay healthy so far this year. So that's a plus, and, knock on wood that continues for him, because as long as he can stay healthy and stay in the lineup and maintain this profile, he's going to be that kind of player who can contribute, in a lot of different places. He leads off against righties, can produce some runs, good lineup, of course. So there's a lot to like about Kiermaier, and he's available just about everywhere.
A platoon guy too, right? I mean, they've seen 2 lefties this week. He did not play in either of those games, but when he plays, he leads off. And so there's going to be a lot of value in that there, right? I mean, no matter what team we're talking about, and this is a Rays team that, once again, just doing that Rays thing, sitting at 30-21. And you look at the names and it's like, how does this make sense? But that's what the Rays are. That's what the Rays do. One more deep league bat we want to get to, Hal, and this is a guy who I alluded to a little bit earlier. Vinnie Pasquantino, another guy you and I talked about on yesterday's edition of this podcast with Alec Lewis, our Royals beat writer. And we asked Alec, is there anything you can give us on when Pasquantino might be up? And the short answer to that was no. Not really. Go listen to the full episode if you want a little bit more nuance to it than that. Alec, obviously, on the ground with the Royals, Vez knows that team very, very well. So he gave us a whole lot more than that short version. But that's what we have right now. Pasquantino just earlier today named the minor league player of the month in the International League after just a ridiculous month, 12 homers in the month of May for Pasquantino. So, Al, I'm sure you and DVR have talked about this. We're waiting. We're trying to get the timing right. Is now the week? Are you comfortable? We don't know what the deal is. Are you comfortable grabbing him and stashing him now, knowing that it might be a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, who knows, before we see Pasquantino up in the majors?
I think that now is the time. And I think back to a few weeks back when we were asking similar questions about Nolan Gorman. What does this guy have to do? All he does is hit home runs. And I went and picked him up in my 12-teamer that week. And then it was the next week that he came up. And it's partly because of that conversation with Alec that I felt like he was worth discussing here, because again, you pretty much, gave the synopsis of what Alec had to say, but he sort of agreed with us that it's like, there's no legitimate reason at this point for Pasquantino to be playing in AAA. So you figure at some point that, reason has to win out. And, again, better to add Pasquantino now than a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now, when maybe it's either too late or just much more costly to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that is if he's sitting on a league sitting on a waiver wire, in a league, when he gets called up, things are going to shoot through the roof. So now is not a bad time. If you feel like you've got a roster spot to play with, I understand not everyone's going to be able to just grab and stash for a guy who we really still don't know. We know what's going to happen. We just don't know exactly when. If you do have that space, this is a guy who can make a huge difference for you. And once he gets the call, he's playing every day. Playing time's not going to be a concern for Pasquantino. We've seen some guys with some big names get called up and flop and have to go back down to the minors. None of us can say that won't be the case with Pasquantino, but he's going to have every opportunity to play every single day until he proves to the Royals that he needs to get sent back down once he is up. And who's to say that is ever going to happen? So definitely a good time to get in on Vinnie Pasquantino. Let's flip things over to the mound, Al, and let's talk about Shane Baz here. Now, obviously, we know what the deal's been with Baz so far this season with the injuries, but what do you think? Where does he fit into this fantasy picture right now?
Well, where he fits in is that he is eligible to return on June 6th. So that is Monday. It doesn't necessarily mean that he will be activated on Monday, but he's made 3 very, very good rehab starts. And the next start he makes could be with the Rays. And if not that one, then probably the one after. So Baz is really widely rostered. So it's not like, it can't hurt to look, but definitely do not expect, like in your 14-teamer, to go on waivers and think that Shane Baz is just going to be sitting there. 10-teamer, he should be there. 12-teamer, maybe you get lucky. So certainly in the shallower leagues, it's worth your while to at least check waivers. And if he is out there, you absolutely have to be aggressive in trying to add Baz to your rotation, because there probably won't be another chance to do it after this week. And he is just one of those impact pitchers that could, go from being on waivers to being your, maybe your number 2 starter rest of season.
Oh, all right. Well, then let me follow up there. I mean, obviously you're talking about best case scenario Shane Baz, but people are obviously maybe thinking about making some moves as well in the trade market, not just on the waiver wire. So if you had just gut feeling, top 35 starting pitcher over or under Shane Baz once he's activated, where do you see him going?
Yeah, that's a great place to put the line. I did say could be a number 2, so that's the upside. But yeah, because I do think he has the potential. I'll take the over on it.
All right, there you go, Shane Baz, a guy who could be very interesting for us once he gets back up with the Rays, which should be sooner rather than later. How about Edward Cabrera, Al, another guy who has become a pretty interesting pitcher to look at here. A really good AAA run this season, made 5 starts at the AAA level, dealing with walks, but also striking out a ton of guys. Got himself up to the Marlins and got himself at least back to the Marlins. Made 1 start so far, and again, same sort of thing. Struck out a lot of dudes in that start, walked a lot of dudes in that start. Where does he factor in for you?
Well, and just one more thing about that start, it was at Coors Field.
Yep.
So, definitely some extra points for degree of difficulty for that one. Just gave up a CJ Cron single, but kind of what you were describing, Michael. He hit 2 batters, walked 4 batters. So that seems like a little microcosm of what Edward Cabrera has done in the minors, what we probably should expect from him to do in the Marlins rotation. So if you're good in ERA and WHIP, but you're bringing up the rear in terms of strikeouts, this is your guy. But I think that Cabrera is worth picking up at 12 teamers. I would not pick him up with the expectation that you set him and forget him. I think you got to pick your spots. I think if you've got a good lineup, a lineup full of patient hitters, could be a short outing for Cabrera. But, if he could do like he did against Colorado and work around those base runners, and he could do that because, he's got great stuff and he can miss bats. So won't start for you every week, but probably more often than not, he would.
Al, let's take a quick pause on the pitchers and take this question from Jokic. Nikola Jokic watching our show, taking a break from being back-to-back NBA MVP to watch some fantasy baseball and talk with us. Any long-term concerns about Jake Cronenworth here? Been an albatross for the Joker in his 12-team Roto redraft league. Not many great second base options. What are you thinking on Cronenworth right now if he's on one of your rosters?
Yeah, that's a good question because he's a player that I did have some concerns about coming into this year just because there's not a ton of raw power there. So you're really looking for Cronenworth to hit for average, get on base, produce some runs. And if he's not doing that, there's probably just not a lot of value. So in a 12-teamer, I get what what the situation is here. You might not have a better alternative out there. But I think he's droppable in a 12-teamer, and I think you could, stream somebody like a Ramon Urias for a week and then make the longer term issue next week's problem.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a chance that he would lose any playing time when Fernando Tatis returns also. I mean, I wouldn't like he wouldn't be if I were managing the Padres, he wouldn't be the first guy who I would cut playing time away from when Tatis comes back, but he's got to be in the discussion. And I'm not managing the Padres, right? Maybe that will be the first move.
What's up with that, Michael?
I don't know, man. I submitted a resume. I thought I was a really good candidate, and I'm still just here talking about Jake Cronenworth rather than managing Jake Cronenworth. It's unbelievable. But anyway, I think that is going to be something to think about when Fernando Tatis does get back in the field. So thank you for your question, Joker Jokic. And anyone else watching, if you have any questions, Al and I will be here for a little bit longer going through the rest of the guys we're looking at on the wire. So feel free to drop those questions into the chat. Spencer Strider, Al, definitely someone who we need to talk about here. Is this fantasy baseball's most valuable non-closing reliever?
Not anymore because he's in the rotation now. So found a way to wiggle out of that question. So he's going to get another shot this weekend, made one start earlier this week. Not a great line, by the way, for him against the Diamondbacks. Gave up a 3-run homer in the first inning to Pavin Smith. That kind of ruined the line for him. But overall, a much better start than the stats would indicate. And then he's pitching in Colorado this weekend. So it's kind of a weird situation, right? Because if he doesn't do well and he's out there on waivers, you think, okay, well, is this the Coors effect, or is Strider just not maybe as valuable as a starter as he was in the bullpen? I would lean towards, giving him a lot of benefit of the doubt. Like I said, that Arizona start was better than the stats look. A start in Colorado, unless it's completely abysmal, I do think you have to give Strider the benefit of the doubt there. And if he does well, then, I think be prepared to go a little extra in Fab this weekend, because if the numbers even partially translate from what he did in the bullpen, this is somebody who's going to give you strikeouts, give you great ratios, and be really valuable.
Yeah, definitely a guy who, regardless of what the role is the rest of the season, should be on teams in basically, I would venture to say, the vast majority of fantasy leagues. Al, one more pitcher to talk about here before we get to the streamers. I want to believe that you did this for me, buddy. It's like you knew I was going to be on for you, because Ross Stripling over the years has been someone who I've loved going back to. Hasn't always worked out for me, but here we find him once again in a waiver wire discussion. Where are you adding Ross Stripling this weekend?
12 teamers. And I mean, he's available in most mixed leagues at this point. So it's not just 12 teamers. I'm definitely going to look to be adding Stripling in my 15 teamers. He's out there in those leagues, but with Hyun-Jin Ryu out, he is back in the Blue Jays rotation. And unlike in some of our past conversations, Michael, I am now with you on I'm with you on Team Stripling
It took
because
like 3 years.
yeah. Well, I mean, before what I always say, oh, he gives up too many home runs. Well, he's been a lot better with that so far this year. Not a lot of home runs. I'm not exactly sure what the explanation is behind it, but his four seamer, which he relies pretty heavily on, it's become much more of a ground ball pitch this year. So with that problem seemingly out of the way, I'm all in on Stripling. And this week, I mean, it doesn't get much better than this. 2 road starts, filling in for Ryu. The first one at Kansas City, the second one to Detroit.
Beautiful. Love a trip. I mean, who doesn't love a trip through the AL Central? Kansas City, Detroit, a banged up White Sox team. It's freaking beautiful. Gotta love that AL Central. One question here from Disco Dave before we get to streamers for the week ahead. When Dylan Carlson comes off the IL, would you drop which one of these guys for him? The guys we talked about earlier in the show, Christopher Morel or Michael Harris?
Definitely not Morel.
Can't drop Morel right now.
No. That's a tough one for me. I do think, I mean, before I said that, you got to bench Harris and see how he does. There's so much upside there.
No. You can make the bench. No bench for Disco Dave.
Right. Well, so yeah. So basically what I'm getting at here is that you do have to choose between him and Carlson. I do think you have to give Carlson a little bit more benefit of the doubt here. So it's a really tough call, but that's what I would do.
So you're ranking these 3 guys, Morel, Carlson, Harris.
That is correct.
All right, let's talk some streamers, Al, for the week ahead. Let's get into Shallow League streamers. Start with Garrett Whitlock. What do you like about him?
I mean, I like the performance so far. I am a little bit concerned because as a starter, he's not been getting the swing and miss to the same degree as he did in the bullpen, but still he's been pretty effective. And this is another, what should be a 2-start week for Whitlock. And now Michael Wacha's got the Monday start against the Angels. So he looks very safe in the 7-game week to get 2 starts at the Angels and then at the Mariners. Whitlock pitching on Tuesday should get both of those same assignments. I mean, obviously, again, you have to think about if there's, a postponement of a game or something, that obviously is a little bit dicier when you're relying on that Sunday start. But even with 1 start, I like Whitlock. I like him even a lot better with a second start at Seattle.
Dakota Hudson looks like he's lined up for a couple of starts this coming week at Tampa, home for Cincinnati. That's not a bad draw, even though we talked up Tampa a little bit earlier when we were talking about Kevin Kiermaier.
Yeah, it's good that they're going to be facing the Reds in St. Louis. So I think that for me definitely swings the pendulum a little bit in Hudson's favor. Now, this would have been maybe a different discussion if it were DVR, because it seems like anytime the topic of Dakota Hudson comes up, he's very skeptical. And I am too in most cases. But like you said, Michael, it's a decent 2-step. So I think just for volume, it's a good play.
And then how about Jeffrey Springs? Is this a last hurrah situation for him? If he even gets that hurrah, have we already seen the last hurrah for Jeffrey Springs? Because when Boz is back up and back in the rotation, it seems likely that he's the guy who gets the boot.
I would think so. And it's a shame because Springs has really been awfully good. And the maybe the other scenario I could see is Ryan Yarbrough going to the bullpen. But
it's not any of the other. It's not McClanahan, obviously. It's not Rasmussen. It's not Kluber.
Right, exactly. So, if you are counting on Jeffrey Springs, a lot of people have picked him up in the past week. So if you're one of those folks, maybe you've become anti-Ryan Yarbrough and you're hoping maybe he goes to the bullpen. But I think it's worth talking about because Springs is atop or near the top of a lot of the most added lists. And I do think he's a risk to go to the bullpen where he earlier in the season, he had been very good, very effective, but obviously not as much fantasy value in that role. So I would actually shy away from Springs, even though he's got a chance maybe to make at least 1 start this week. And that would be either the Cardinals or the Twins.
Yep.
But yeah, he would be a low priority for me. I really do worry that he's going to lose a spot.
Home for St. Louis if he gets in there. More likely lined up to be at Minnesota, but that's something that we'll have to watch. And if you're putting those claims in this weekend, maybe one that you don't necessarily go after. We got a question here from Red Letter Day, Al. This is referring back to Kyle Farmer, who we talked about at length earlier in the show. So Red Letter, if you missed that question, go ahead and you can listen back to the podcast. And we did a lot about Kyle Farmer. But let's take that second part of the question there, Al. When Anthony Rendon comes back, if you don't have an obvious spot, like, are you keeping Farmer? Are you finding a way to keep him? Or is this just get Rendon back in there and Farmer is sort of the odd man out?
Honestly, I'm probably letting Farmer go, but it has to, obviously it does have to do with what your other drop options are.
Yep.
Because I do think that Farmer gets gets overlooked and that he is somebody who can contribute in a lot of different ways. But yeah, given that that is kind of the guy that he is, I even described him that way. Like he's your back of the roster guy. So you're bringing Rendon back, then, it would probably stand to reason that most likely that Farmer is going to be your best drop option.
Yeah. Sometimes you just are happy with what you got out of the guy when your regular was on the IL and you say, thanks so much. We'll get you a playoff share. And that will be that. Let's talk about some medium league streams here, Al. We've got Michael Wacha and Tyler Wells. How do you rank them against one another? You can only have one. And what do you like about them this week?
Well, this is a tough one just because Wacha, as I mentioned before, he's got the 2 starts and it's pretty much a gimme that he'll get both at the Angels, at Seattle, because he's going to be making the Monday start. Wells is just lined up for 1 start this week. But even with that said, that 1 start is at Kansas City, and I trust Wells more. They've got very similar profiles, not a lot of strikeouts, fly ball pitchers. Wells in particular, and this is something that I pointed out in the column this week. Wells leads the major leagues in terms of launch angle on fly balls. So a lot, it's too bad that pop outs don't rate a category in fantasy, because if so, Tyler Wells would be a stud. But in real baseball, I mean, a pop-up is basically as good as a strikeout. It's an automatic out. Yeah. And Wells has been getting a ton of those. So while you're not going to be rewarded with strikeouts in fantasy, you will definitely be rewarded in ERA and WHIP. It's a great matchup. Wacha is definitely the bigger reward play with 2 starts, but obviously bigger chance of him blowing up. I don't really love that Angels matchup too much for him. So Wells is the safer play. I feel like that's one that's going to pay off for you if you pick them up.
All right. The deep league stream includes Connor Pilkington and Mitch White. Same question as with the medium league streamers. Who do you like better if you could only have one, and how do you measure them just on their own merit this week?
I would maybe give a slight edge to Pilkington here. There's really a lot of strikeout potential for him. I mean, they both have some appeal in their own way. But both lining up for 2 starts. So Pilkington, this is a really great double dip. I think this is another thing that goes in Pilkington's favor. At home against Texas, and then at home against Oakland. And then, as good as it gets. Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, it's hard to beat that. Could really be a lot of strikeouts across those 2 games. And then Mitch White, it's road starts at the White Sox. That's pretty nice. And then at San Francisco, I think that one's a little tougher, and also not necessarily going to get that second one. Also depends on when Clayton Kershaw might come back. So I think Pilkington's a safer bet for 2 starts. His 2 starts would be better matchups, and I think he's got better strikeout potential. So yeah, Pilkington for me.
A couple more questions for us. Well, actually, first one's just a comment, sarcastic and fun. That sounds fun. Like spring's better than Yarborough. Thanks for watching, sarcastic and fun. And then Forrest has this question for us. Forgetting the catcher thing, is Dalton Varsho a better player for you than Josh Rojas?
Yeah.
I would tend to agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, what a combo. What a combo of a player that you're getting. I went heavy on Dalton Varsho in my home league because of the catcher thing. But this is better than I was expecting. That power speed combo has just been a whole lot of fun for him right now. Let's wrap things up with the closer corner. Al, let's start with Jhoan Duran. What are we thinking about him going into this weekend here?
Well, it's been it feels like it's been a long, long time since we've had a closer situation that we could get really excited about. I'm still kind of feeling that way, but in shallower leagues where Duran is likely available, I think that it's time to take the plunge with him, because I think he's definitely getting the edge over Emilio Pagan. Pagan just coming off of a blown save.
Also out this weekend in Toronto. So an opportunity for Duran.
Yeah, so that very good point there. Good thing to keep in mind too for daily leagues. So yeah, I think probably he's the closer, at least in shallower leagues, that you could really take a look at this week.
Yeah, and then also for what it's worth, and it should be worth a lot because our beat writers are there with these teams every single day. Aaron Gleeman, who covers the Twins for us, was with us on this very show a couple of weeks ago, and this was when the Twins were still like, who is it? They were still mixing and matching a ton at the back end of the bullpen, and he was totally committed. He was, I mean, there was no equivocation in his voice. He said for sure, Jhoan Duran eventually is the closer for this team this season. And so maybe we're seeing that start to happen right here and right now. How about the situation in Detroit, Al? How are you looking at this? I mean, the last 3 saves have all gone to Gregory Soto. So seems like he is the guy, but obviously everything that's not nailed down could be on the trade block in Detroit. So what are you looking at here?
Well, that's a really good angle to look at this from, because going back a few weeks, where it looked like Soto might have been on the verge of losing the job, I picked up Will Vest in a few leagues, and then pretty shortly after that, he went on the IL. But yeah, maybe it's going to be a while before Vest or Andrew Chafin or whoever might else sees that job is going to have an opportunity. I think Chafin too could maybe be a trade chip for the Tigers. So
Yeah, for sure.
Vest rather, I think probably, much less likely so. So in deep leagues, I still think it's probably a good idea to pick up Vest and stash him. I do like him out of the options in this bullpen. Soto, though, the thing is that I thought maybe if he wasn't that widely rostered, that he'd be a good guy to pick up right now, just because he is getting the saves, but he's actually not that easy to find on waivers. So I think this is pretty much a deep league speculation who gets the saves after Soto, possibly gets traded. And I still like Will Vest there.
All right, Al, we've got one more closer situation that we want to talk about. We do have a couple of questions that I want to get to also, because we got to reward the people for watching us here on YouTube live as we're doing this. This question from Champs Want Ken. Your thoughts on Luis Guillorme for the rest of the season? Rolling WOBA window looks really good.
Yeah, it does. That he came up on, I can't remember now, episode maybe we did. I can't remember, but yeah, I think that he's been a little bit under rostered and underrated in fantasy circles. I'm not quite ready to think 12 teamer with him, but I think anything deeper, it's time to take the plunge there.
All right, and then we do have a question that pertains to a 12-teamer from Disco Dave, who added Jose Barrios in a 12-teamer. If you do that, Al, if you're adding Barrios, so obviously it hasn't been pretty for him this season, how long are you giving him in a 12-teamer before you would maybe go in another direction?
Yeah, a long time, because it's, this is somebody that you would have drafted as an SP2 or SP3, and I'm typically in a 12-teamer. Maybe I'm churning my 4th and 5th spots, but not definitely not the 2 or the 3. So I would say at least a month.
Yeah, right. The upside side hasn't been there, but the upside's certainly high. And I mean, who would have thought that he would be like comfortably the number 3 in Toronto? But with the way Alek Manoah is throwing the ball, with the way Kevin Gausman throwing the ball this season, Toronto Blue Jays, I would consider a bet on them. Just throwing it out there. I talked about it earlier this week, but to win the East, to win the World Series, I mean, this team, that offense is going to get right. And with Manoah going, Gausman going, still love these Toronto Blue Jays. All right, Al, let's wrap things up. One more closer situation to talk about. And again, this is sort of like the Ross Stripling, the Kevin Kiermaier thing. At some point in a fantasy season, you're going to have to wonder just what the hell's going on in Cincinnati's bullpen. And that's where we find ourselves to wrap up this episode.
Yeah, well, we're seemingly there pretty much every week. But yeah, I think it's worth revisiting this one, because I think Tony Santillan might be kind of pulling away with this one a little bit. That's maybe making it a little bit too strong, but he's definitely gotten some looks lately, and up to, I'm going to double check this. Yeah, 4 saves. I just want to make sure I got the total right. So we've talked a lot about Art Warren when he was healthy. We talked about Lucas Sims. We haven't really talked that much about Santillan as a closer, and I wouldn't put him in the same category as Duran. Where you could look at him in some shallower leagues. I think this is more maybe at best a 15-team move. But again, it's been a few weeks since we've really talked about some viable candidates. If you're really struggling for saves and you just need to throw a dart, I would take the shot with Santillan.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us here live on this episode of the Athletic Fantasy Baseball Podcast as we get things ready for this weekend's waiver wire. And hey, even just to you who are listening to the podcast version of this right now, you missed out on 2 incredibly handsome faces for 50 minutes. So that's sort of your loss, but we still appreciate the download, the listen, and the follow with us all season long. Good luck with all of your waiver bids this weekend, and we will be back with you with our familiar 4-episode schedule next week. So be with us for that. For Al Melchior, I'm Michael Beller. Thanks again. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you all soon.